Most event planners are overwhelmed. There's typically too much going on. There's typically 1,000 places you could put your attention. How do you figure out the most useful place to put your attention?
Welcome to Season 4 of the Convene podcast, brought to you by Madrid Convention Bureau. This season was recorded on-site during Convene Pcma 2024, and we're kicking it off with one of the keynotes from the event, Michael Bungay Stanier. Together with him, we speak about the power of questions, especially when you're overwhelmed, building communities, and co-creating human relationships. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Convene podcast. Today I'm joined by Michael Bungay Stanier, who I actually call MBS because he calls himself MBS.
It's just, my name is long and complicated, and MBS just often feels shorter. You can call me that or Michael, whatever suits you.
Michael's fine. And I do know about complicated names. Mine is one of those as well.
That's true.
I think I'm fangirling here a little bit because I know a lot about your work, and I hope our listeners would be as immersed into it after this episode as am I.
Thanks,
and
Peggy.
Michael helps people be a force for change. And that's, I think, one of the big things that stands out for me in your work. And if I have to do a little introduction, you're best known for your book, The Coaching Habit, which has sold more than 1 million copies.
I know. It's amazing. That's a lot of books.
That's a lot of books.
Most books sell less than 5,000 copies in their entire life. So 1 million copies is ridiculous.
Yeah, and you're self-published.
Yes.
Which I have to mention because that's an important add-on here.
That's helpful, yeah.
And your latest work, your latest book, How to Work with Almost Anyone, was the topic of your keynote, which was very enlightening. And I think it just lifted people up in the morning. So that was amazing.
Thank you.
You founded Box of Crayons, doing some consulting work, if I can put it this way.
Consulting and training. That's right.
Yeah. And I think one of the fun facts that you share often about yourself is that you left Australia 30 years ago. The first time when I heard it, I was like, yeah, because everything in Australia tries to kill you. So that's why it just makes sense that you leave Australia. Yeah, exactly. But it was to become a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford University, where you say that your only achievement was to meet your wife.
That's right.
And then relocate to Canada.
That's it. Although my wife is here in Barcelona with me, so we're having a really nice time here in Barcelona, as well as me getting to do this work with you as well. So it's a double win. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So it's really a great pleasure for me to have you on the podcast.
Thanks,
and
Maggie.
I really want to start with a simple question. What did you notice today?
Well, one of the things that you notice as a speaker is the energy in the room. And I'm going to say there are two things that really stood out. The first is how hard the team organizing this conference have worked to design something that is elegant and useful. There's a real sense of no matter where you are in your journey in the event world, you can find a path for you that's going to be really helpful for you. So that I noticed that. I noticed the kind of the general enthusiasm of people in the room. Sometimes you work and the crowd's a bit quiet and a bit sleepy and a bit passive. And even though I was doing a morning keynote, which is, and people arrived yesterday. So yesterday was, it's exciting and let's party. People were really up for the conversation. So that was lovely. And then the third thing I've just noticed is how good the catering is. And, what's clear is that if you want a really good conference experience, go to the conference that's being run by people who think about running conferences the whole time, because they're like, we can't do a bad conference here. We have to get everything just right. And I'm the beneficiary of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just had a workshop on the coaching habit.
Mm-hmm.
So how can event managers who work with not only, internally in their companies, but externally when they work with third parties, with clients, how can they be a bit more coach-like?
Yeah. So it's worth going, well, what does coach-like even mean for that? Because some people who are listening are like, well, I'm not even sure what that language means. Part of what I'm trying to do is make coaching a regular way of interacting with other human beings. And I've even stopped calling it coaching. That's why I say coach-like, because most people don't want to be a coach. But there's something really powerful about the technology of coaching, which is at its heart curiosity. So the way I define this is, look, can you stay curious a little bit longer? And can you rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly? And you can do that with any human being you're interacting with your partners, with your collaborators, with your clients, with your partner, with your kids. Everybody, some of the time, is going to be excited that you're not telling them what to do, but you're asking them a good question. So one of the things that can happen beyond a team that you might lead is like if you're trying to work with somebody, you go, let's have a conversation where I ask you some questions about what we're trying to solve together, what was hard about it, what you want. And the very act of asking questions puts the spotlight on the other person and allows them to feel seen and feel heard and feel connected, and allows you to see them and hear them and connect with them. So if you're looking to strengthen the working or living relationships with people, staying curious is a pretty good way of doing that.
Yeah. And I just have to mention also why you catch things like, I need to define coach like, because you're also a podcast host yourself, of 2 Pages with MBS, which is a lovely and very different podcast from what's out there, where brilliant people read 2 pages of their favorite books or books that transform them the most.
That's it. Yeah. You know, I've run other podcasts in the past, and I was like, I want to disrupt the usual interview process, particularly if I'm interviewing people who've had lots of experience of being on podcasts, because they kind of, slip into their old stories and they do their usual thing. So getting people to pick 2 pages from a book and read it, and then we talk about what they read, takes the conversation in just a slightly different angle. And I love that conversation. So thanks for listening. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And well, thank you for putting it out there, because it's really interesting. I think the last one that I listened to was with Raj.
Sisodia.
Yeah.
Yes, Sisodia, yeah.
Which was a completely different conversation than what his work is all about, and what he's, it connected at the end.
Right.
But it was just a different take on how he sees
it tends to come through what lights people up, and then we'll often connect to their work, but not always. So that's part of what I like about it, the kind of the sidewaysness of it all. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about your best working relationship that you've had.
Well, it's my best and my worst working relationship at the same time. And it's with Marcella, my wife, who you've heard about because you read a newsletter or 2 or heard me on podcasts. So I've been married to Marcella for 30 years. We met 32 years ago when we were at Oxford together, just as you said. For a period of time, she worked in the business with me. And it happened because she was actually working as a bookseller. She worked in something called the world's biggest bookstore in Toronto. It doesn't exist anymore. They knocked it down. But she loved being a bookseller. She was really great. She had training in literature and also as a librarian. So she's very pro reading. And a bookseller was like, I'm going to give you all these great books. But I took her skiing in Whistler, took her downhill skiing for the first time. And it all went well until it went badly wrong. And she had a fall and she tore all the ligaments in her knee, and there's a whole thing. And so by the time we got back to Toronto, she couldn't work in the bookstore anymore. She had to go through this kind of recovery and recuperation. And in that time, we kind of decided that she'd come and help me work at Box of Crayons in the business. And first 3 months were terrible because we kept trying to start this, and she'd be like, "Nobody's going to tell me what to do. You can disappear." She doesn't love having a boss, and I was technically her boss. Very complicated. But somehow we figured that out. And then we had 5 or 6 years of working really well together, where we used to call her the vice president of everything else. So I would be the front person and give speeches and write books and kind of do the appearance. And she would do all the stuff behind the scenes, which is where she really flourishes. And then in the final year that she worked, it became difficult again because the business was growing, and we had 2 different visions for the business. I wanted to grow it and enjoy that. She wanted to keep it smaller. And so we kind of clashed a fair bit in that. But the middle bit was fantastic. So, it's like that Charles Dickens book, The Best of Times and the Worst of Times. She was all of that. Yeah.
Did you take something away from it that you then now put in the book?
Yeah. The question that I wish we'd asked and used to shape our relationship is, how will we repair it when things go wrong? Because, it's difficult any time a working relationship gets dented or cracked or goes off the rails a little bit. But when it's the person with whom you're living, it's like you have a fight about something at work, and then you got to have a conversation about who's cooking dinner and who's doing the washing up and all of that sort of stuff. And it's complicated and messy. So that process of how do we repair the relationship, we could have done a better job at. Now, what helped us is we hired a coach to help us work together. And that made it easier for us and also got us through some of the difficult moments. But certainly this new book of mine, How to Work with Almost Anyone, draws on lots of lessons I've had from when I've been part of dysfunctional working relationships.
Yeah, and we all have. And
we all have dysfunctional, yeah. It's very, very human. Yeah.
Exactly. And it seems to me that your work with the coach you have now with this book, it has a lot of it revolves around questions.
It does.
And how to use questions to really build better relationships.
Yeah.
So I know you don't like your advice most.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to event planners? How do they start? And the reason why I'm asking this is, as a person who follows your work, I figure out that people have not only the resistance to ask these questions, but also when you ask, they tend to sometimes pull back.
Right.
And be like, I don't know if I want to go there, but they won't voice it. They'll just mumble an answer that you would, probably would just crumble the relationship.
Right. Got it. Well, I think part of what you're asking is, why would you bother going through this hard work of asking questions? Because I think asking questions is typically harder than just giving advice. Most of us are pretty well practiced at being the authority, making decisions, offering up opinions, offering up advice, so you could stay in that comfortable place. And for me, you're trying to do two things. You're trying to do the work that matters most and has the most impact, and you're trying to bring out the best in the people with who you're working. And the thing about coaching is it can do both of those things. So when you're an event planner, and you decide and something comes up in the event that you're planning, rather than you leaping in and going, all right, here's how I think we should fix it. If you ask the person you're working with, so what's the real challenge here for you? What you're doing is you're actually collaboratively trying to figure out, look, there's a bunch of reasons why this might be going wrong. There's a bunch of reasons why this might be difficult. Of all the things that are going on, what's the most important thing for us to solve? So that is about getting strategic and going, how do I help the people I work with to direct their energy and their attention on the stuff that really matters? But also when you ask the question, what's the real challenge here for you? You're helping that other person learn and grow and develop, and you're bringing out their best as well. And in fact, the very act of asking the question means that you're empowering them, you're giving them power. And that is also an act of leadership. So I think, at its heart, no matter whether this is with your team or with a partner or a collaborator, when you ask these questions, what's the challenge? You're trying to do two things. Stay focused on the most important work, because most event planners are overwhelmed. There's typically too much going on. There's typically 1,000 places you could put your attention. How do you figure out the most useful place to put your attention? And also, how do you bring out the best in the people with whom you work?
And I love the follow-up question. And what else?
Yeah. So those of you who know the coaching habit, and you do clearly know that of the 7 questions in the book, and what else is the one that I say is the most powerful coaching question. Because and what else, which is a question most people don't even hear when you ask them. But what it does is it realizes that their first answer is never their only answer, and rarely their best answer. So when you go, so what's the real challenge here for you? And they go, blah, blah, blah. Instead of being seduced into thinking that actually is their best, the real thing, you go, what else? What else is a challenge? And then you go, what? Great. What else is a challenge? And what else is a challenge? And is anything else a challenge? And then you go, so what, out of all of those things, what's the real challenge here for you? And you're just likely to get a little more powerfully clear on what's really going on for people.
Yeah, and what I love in this is that you're not pointing fingers. So especially in the situation you said, there is an issue happening, let's say on site.
Mm-hmm.
When you go with the authority of, I'm going to solve this for you, it not only diminishes the person, but it's like, you really like, you're slapping the person in the face pretty much.
Yeah, sometimes that's true. Yeah, because if you're leading a group, either you've got direct control or indirect control. It is true that every time you step in and you do something or you make a decision or you give a direction, you're potentially taking away the opportunity for somebody else to do that. Now, there are some times where it's your job to make the decision or give the advice or do the direction. So this isn't about just giving up all responsibility. But one of the things that I think is a really powerful lesson to learn as a leader is it is often useful to let the other person do it, even though they'll do it 80% as well as you. Which means that somewhere inside, part of you is dying because you're like, it's 80% as well as I could do, but it's good enough. And 80% means that I can then coach them and support them to get to 100%. And 80% done by somebody else means that you now have your time to actually do your job rather than doing your job and somebody else's job as well.
Yeah, and I think I just want to hang in there with the good enough, which for many event professionals who are perfectionists by nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes they don't see where's the line of good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're focusing on being perfect. So I just want to highlight, yes, 80% is good enough.
And you set the standard of what good enough is, but I love what you're pointing to, which is it's worth you figuring out what good enough is, because if the only standard you have is the standard that I would do this at, that might be true for a few things, but typically you've over-engineered the standard, and you've also made it impossible for anybody but you to do any of this work, which is like, it'll crush you, it'll kill you in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. A word from our sponsor.
Voted the world's best meeting destination for 5 consecutive years, Madrid offers an exceptional transport network, breathtaking spaces, world-class dining and accommodations, and a vibrant lifestyle that seamlessly blends business with leisure. Make your next meeting Madrileño. Discover more with the Madrid Convention Bureau.
Now back to the program. And something else that we are speaking a lot in the industry about is community. Building a community, creating a community, engaging it throughout the year, not only at an event. And I think you have quite a bit of an experience now with the Conspiracy, which is your community.
That's right.
That you've built. Can you share a little bit of how you went about it? And I don't know, maybe some of the behind the scenes.
Sure. So I wrote a book a few years ago called How to Begin. And it is a book to help people find their worthy goal, a goal that is thrilling and important and daunting. And I think this is often useful for anybody who's at a crossroads in their life. And there are a few kind of classic crossroads. One is kind of in your mid-20s when you're kind of just finished university or school and you're like, okay, my brain has finally kind of got into adult mode and I'm ready to be an adult. What does that mean? Another is kind of 35 to 40, which is the classic midlife crisis window where you've spent the last 10 years climbing a mountain. And you got to the top of it and gone, is this even the mountain I wanted to climb? Am I happy here? And then the other one is like people, let's say 55 plus or minus a little bit, who are kind of coming to the end of their traditional career. They can feel retirement coming, but they're still feeling young. I mean, I know to young people who look at people like me, who I'm 56, and they're like, yeah, you're old, man. And I'm like, I know I look old, and I know I move like I'm old, but inside is a young person, so I'm still feel pretty young. And that's that climbing the second mountain, they sometimes call it. So the community, the Conspiracy, which is so called because it means the etymology, the meaning of the word is to breathe together, con with spire, to breathe out, breathe together, is a community of people working on their worthy goals together. So if for people who are thinking about building community, I'd say a few things. One is it always takes way more the energy than you think to keep a community connected and engaged. It's not enough just to get people to pay a membership fee and cross into the doorway. It's like any event. Like if you don't do something to make people connect and merge and interact, it's weird and lonely. So the way we've designed our community is, first of all, we tried not to make me at the heart of it. So part of the reason people sign up, for some anyway, is that they get to be me behind the scenes and that. But I really don't want to make me the hero of this community. So we put people into small groups of 4 and we get them to work together and interact together. And so what they're doing is we're trying to get them to build specific relationships in the community. And for that, we also have a kind of every week we have opportunity to get together and just meet other conspirators, and also opportunities just to get together and work with other conspirators. You have an hour and you work together with your video camera on. It's just like, hey, we're just hanging out in the same digital room, working together. The other thing I think is helpful is we have lots of starts and finishes. It's not just we started once and then the same thing carries on forever. We work in a 6-week cycle. So every 6 weeks we start something, goes for 6 weeks, we complete something, we take a week or 2 break, and then we start another chapter, as we call it. And creating opportunities to start and finish creates milestones for people to re-engage and kind of get back into it. So I think those are my key lessons from building the community. We have 2 people who spend a bunch of time nudging people, cajoling people, encouraging people, posting there. Because even in the most active community, you've got 25% of people who are really visibly active and 75% of people who are kind of cruising a little bit.
Yeah. I wonder, did you take some learnings? Because I don't know if you currently have it, but you had this 1-year course, the Year of Living Brilliantly.
Yeah.
I remember that you wanted to redo it or change things.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure that out. We launched that a number of years ago. And what we discovered is, even though we built into it lots of stops and starts, every 6 weeks there'd be a kind of break and a chance to just people found it hard to stay engaged for a whole year. People started off keen, and then by week number 48, they're like, even though basically what it is every week you get a short lesson from somebody who I think is cool and who I admire. So part of what we're doing is trying to reboot it so we give people a better chance to find the teachers that they most want to see and hear, and more actively kind of engage with it. Yeah. It's hard to keep people's attention. That's the truth of it. Yeah.
That's for sure. I did the whole year.
Oh, good for you.
And I think along the way I made a few connections, by the way, that kind of also got me through because we were nudging each other.
Yeah.
So that was important. And it happened just because you also encouraged a lot of the comments to happen on the platform.
Yeah. So this insight that when people show up, even if they're excited to be there, there's one part of their brain going, you're alone, you're among strangers, this is a terrible idea, what are you doing? So I think this really plays into, for any conference organizer. You didn't ask me about this, but what it's bringing up is this insight around the neuroscience of engagement. So there's some basic science that is really helpful to understand what people want and how they act. And it influences how I design a keynote and how I design a workshop and how I write a book and how I design a Year of Living Brilliantly, all of these things, and might be helpful for people as they think about the conferences that they organize. So the starting point is to realize that 5 times a second, at an unconscious level, the brain is asking, is it safe here or is it dangerous? Safe, dangerous, safe, dangerous, safe, dangerous. It's obsessed with that because the brain's only real job is to keep you alive. it'll tell you elsewise, but it's like, my job is to keep you alive, because the longer you live, the better chance there is of the DNA being passed on by you having kids. So I'm just trying to keep you alive. And anytime it moves into any environment, it's scanning, going, is it safe here or is it dangerous? If it feels safe, you get people leaning in, you get people being their best, you get people contributing. If it feels dangerous, you get people in their lizard brain, fight or flight mode, being responsive, being a bit more black and white, being a bit more defensive. So you can guess that if you're running a conference or an event, you're trying to make it feel safe. So how do you make it feel safe? Well, there are 4 drivers that people have that help the brain figure out whether it feels safe or not. Tribe, expectation, rancor, and autonomy. Terra, T-E-R-A, tribe, expectation, rancor, autonomy. So with tribe, the brain is asking, are you with me or are you against me? When people show up at an event for the first time, particularly if they're by themselves, the brain is going, it's you versus everybody else. It doesn't feel very safe. So part of what I'd be thinking if I was organizing an event is like, how do I encourage a sense of tribiness right away? Now, there's ways you do it. Like everybody wears their name badge. So we've all now got the same branding and the same experience. And so that immediately goes, oh, look, we're at the same event together. So we're in a tribe. But, finding a way of connecting people and pairing them up or getting them into a small group as fast as possible. So like, oh, I've got some people on my side can be really helpful. And it's why, people were enthusiastic about my keynote speech. In part because I just got people talking to each other. And it was like, oh, this is so great. I get to connect. I get to make some friends. I get to have a conversation with other people next to me. I feel less alone. I increase the sense of tribiness. It's like with my workshop, I waited outside the door and I shook everybody's hand as I was coming in. That's a sense of me connecting with them and doing a tribiness connection. The second driver is expectation, which is like, do I know what's going to happen or do I not know? So the more you can tell people to go, they spend less time going, what's happening, and more going, oh, I know what's happening now, the safer they feel. The third driver is rank, and the brain is asking, are you more or less important than me? So it's like, how do you elevate people to feel like they're not just passive recipients, but they're contributors in some ways, that they're more rather than less important? That can be really powerful. And then the fourth option is autonomy, and like the brain is asking, do I have any say in this, or are you making choices for me? So when Jamie talked us through the design architecture of this experience here in Barcelona, she's like, here's how you plot your own journey. Here's how you might find yourself. Here's how you might identify yourself. Here are the choices you might make in terms of what workshops you go to, what keynotes you go to, what other interactive sessions you go to. All of that is helping to raise the terror quotient to make it feel safer for people. And the safer things feel for people, the more they're likely to lean in and engage. And just to wrap this all up in a bow, one of the great ways of raising tribe and expectation and rank and autonomy is to ask good questions. And so this whole driver of mine to ask questions and give people the best questions to ask helps with this sense of safety as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I was about to ask you how event planners can take these learnings and really make networking a bit easier and a bit more intentional for people.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's so many different configurations of events that there's probably 1,000 different ideas around that. And if you're an event planner listening to this, I'd be going onto ChatGPT or your AI of your choice and going, what are the 20 best ways that conferences make it easier for people to interact and get to know people? And obviously I'd be going to conferences and stealing as many ideas as possible around that. Some things feel like they should work, but in my experience, don't work as well in reality. It's like, go find the person who has the other half of the thing that you've got. That often feels like too hard for people. I was just at a conference where we all got a pebble and we had a shape in a certain color painted. It's like purple square or a green triangle or a yellow circle or a pink asterisk. And you had to go and find the two other people who had the same color shape combination as you did. And really nobody did that. It felt like a really good idea, but somehow it was too difficult to pull out your pebble and go, do you have this? So maybe there's a way of, on people's name tags, giving them a thing that they have to connect with other people. So I don't have to say, show me your pebble. I can just look at your name tag and go, oh, you've got a pink asterisk. Oh, I met somebody with a pink asterisk. You should meet blah, blah.
That's actually what Jamie and her team did this year with, on the badge, there is peace.
Yeah.
And it says, talk to me about, and then you fill in
That's right.
the topics that you want to talk about.
Yeah, that is interesting.
We'll see if it works.
See if it works. I think it would be helpful to give people their opening question. It's like when you see on somebody's badge, talk to me about Barcelona, I'd say, so the question you ask is, tell me the best thing about whatever the topic might be. And there may be other questions that Jamie could offer up. But often people are like, I just don't know how to get started in a conversation like this. So I see Barcelona and I'm like, okay, but how do I start there? But if you go, look, I'm going to give you your first question. Tell me the best thing about whatever the topic is that they've written down. And so what I would do if I was organizing this as part of Jamie's opening, I'd say, so on your name tag, you've got to ask me about. So step number one, I want you to stop for a moment. I want you to write your topic down right now. All right, so now everybody's filled it out, because as I've walked around, I'm like, not many people have filled out their name tag. So you have to make that happen. And then I'd say, so we're going to practice this. So turn to the person next to you, and I'm going to give you the question you're going to ask them. You're going to look at their name tag, and you're going to say, tell me the best thing about whatever the topic is. And you then get people to rehearse that and practice it. So now you've unweirded this experience, because everybody's had this conversation once, in a safe way, taken through it step by step. So now when I see you in the coffee break and I go, tell me the best thing about this, you're like, oh. And you think of the terror model, this is around setting expectations, which is like, I'm removing all the unknowns, which is like, what do I ask? How does it work? Who goes first? All the little things that stop people from actually acting on that. That is a very geeky answer, but that's a very specific kind of like talking it through, understanding the more subtle resistance to these things and kind of trying to do something about it.
Yeah, and I just have to mention that you speak about the motto in the coaching habits.
That's
so
right. Yeah.
If people want to find something that's, a bit more behind the whole model, you explain there quite well.
Thank you.
And before we finish, a very familiar question that you know very well. Was there anything we didn't mention we should before we finish?
That's a good question. Well, we've covered a fair bit, I think. What do you think the question that people listening to this or watching this might want to ask that we haven't covered yet?
I love how you can turn things
I
around.
know. So it's a classic. This, by the way, for people listening, is a great coaching move. Which is like, if you're trying to coach somebody, be more coach-like, and they ask you a question, which will often make you want to give them an answer. The script that I use, and I'm like, that's a good question. I will answer it. But before I answer it, what do you think? Well, I mean, how would you answer this? And before you know it, they're answering their own question, which helps you be lazy, which makes them feel more autonomous, which makes you actually be more useful in the end.
Yeah, and that's how you coached Brené Brown on her podcast.
That's it.
Which was an extremely fun and awesome episode.
Oh, thank you.
People need to find. It's on her podcast.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Intimidating, because I didn't know she was going to ask me to coach her. So it came out, it was a surprise.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
And now you asked me a question that I was like, okay, let me check my questions.
Yeah.
I actually had so many questions that I wanted to ask you, but I'm mindful of the time.
Yeah. Pick one. Ask me one final question.
So what I really wanted to know is more about the operating manual and how can people use that in an efficient way. And why I'm asking that is I learned about that before I started this job, actually. And I was actually created my whole operating manual, and I was so eager to share it with all my new colleagues. And you can imagine nobody asked me about that. So I did not know how to make it not weird for them.
Yeah.
That I approached them with, hey, that's my operating manual. Now, thank you very much for respecting it.
Well, I love that you brought that up, because all of the information on how to work with almost anyone has its roots in me trying to think about this operating manual idea. And what I realized with an operating manual is most people don't like reading manuals. It's like, when we get when we get a new piece of equipment, who reads the instruction booklet? Exactly. Nobody does. When you sign up for something and you have that kind of thing that you have to tick a box on, who reads that? Nobody does.
Yeah.
So nobody's going to read anything that you send them. The power of the operating manual is the work you've done to figure out who you are. Like when you go through the operating manual, which is this idea of like going, how do I work best and how do I work worst, and what brings me alive and what gets in the way, and how do you pronounce my name? You and I had a conversation beforehand, which is like, well, do you prefer my full name or do you prefer Maggie? All of these little things. You are better informed about you. And why the operating manual shifted from operating manual to Keystone Conversation is people are much more interested in a conversation about how we work well together rather than a presentation from you going, here's my operating manual. Because if you think back to that terror model, an operating manual gives you high rank. Here's me, you figure it out. You do the work to understand me. And if you get it wrong, it's your fault, not my fault, because I gave you an operating manual. So you put you one up and you put them one down. When you go, if you'd send me the operating manual on Maggie before having the podcast, I probably wouldn't have read it. And if I had, I'd have been slightly annoyed by it. I'm like, it's useful, but it's also slightly annoying. Whereas if you and I then instead went, hey, before you press record on the podcast, what makes a good podcast for you? How can I be a really good guest? Let me tell you how you can be a really good host for me. That's a much more interesting conversation. And it feels a lot more co-created. So where we have equal status rather than low status from me, which actually makes me a bit more defensive.
Yeah. So anything you would like to add we didn't add?
I think that was a great conversation. You've done a lot of preparation for this, so you kind of you set me up to answer stuff that you've already read about or heard me talking about before. But what are you taking away from this conversation?
I love that you made it very relatable to our audience. So you made it practical for event planners listening.
Yeah.
Yes, we gave them a lot of things that they can follow up with and read more about, but also there were little practical nuggets that they can live with. That's a good podcast episode for me.
That's perfect.
So thank you so very much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Remember to subscribe to the Convene podcast on your favorite listening platform to stay updated with our latest episodes. We want to thank our sponsor, Madrid Convention Bureau. Learn more about how to make your next meeting madrileño at esmadrid.com/MCB. That is esmadrid.com/MCB. For further industry insights from the Convene team, head over to pcma.org/convene. Stay inspired, keep inspiring, and until next time.